In the name of Allah, hello students, welcome to our class today. I hope you are doing great as usual. As I said to you students yesterday, today we'll start our lesson from parts of processors. As we mentioned to students yesterday, the microprocessor is a multi-function integrated circuit that is in essence the computer. The processor, which is also called the central processing unit or a CPU, is made up of several parts. These parts work together to carry out the instructions and actions that translate to a word processing system or a game on your PC. Parts of processor is shown in the figure as you are seeing. That arithmetic logic unit or ALU, control unit or CO, and the memory that we will have to discuss about all of them separately in the next page. Student, this figure shows the input devices. It's not the component of or the parts of processor, and here is the output devices. The also output devices are not the parts of processor, but this section that divided to three parts. This section shows the parts of processors. But why we joined these parts or the input and output devices with them, just for knowing and just for adding your knowledge about them. That input devices come in the processor, and after that these three parts work together on the data, and after that they give the result to inputs. Okay students, let's go ahead. The first one, students, the first part of memory is the first part of microprocessor or processor is memory. Memory unit, as you see students in the figure, can store instructions, data, and intermediate results. This unit supplies information to other units of the computer when needed. Processor itself has a memory that called cache memory. Also, processor has a closely contact with the main memory or primary memory. As you are seeing, students, in the figure, here's the CPU, and here's the cache memory, and here's the main memory. The first CPU take a contact with the cache, and after cache has a closely contact with the main memory. Okay students, let's go ahead. The next one, students, is the control unit. This unit controls the operations of all parts of the computer, but does not carry out any actual data processing operations. It just controls the operations. At the risk of being obvious, the control unit controls the functions of the CPU. It's kind of like the manager who coordinates the activities between the different parts of a factory. It tells the other parts of the CPU how to operate, what data to use, and where to put the results. Functions of these units are it's responsible for controlling the transfer of data and instructions among other units of a computer. The next one, students, it manages and coordinates all the units of the computer. The next one, students, it obtains the instructions from the memory, interprets them, and directs the operations of the computer. The next, students, let's go in the next page. The next one, students, it communicates with the input-output device or input-output devices for transfer of data or results from storage. The next one, students, important. Partly it's important to say, students, it doesn't not process or store data. Okay students, let's go ahead. Okay students, ALU or arithmetic logic unit. Arithmetic section. The first one, students, arithmetic section. As we said, students, the ALU or arithmetic logic unit consists of two subsections. Normally, arithmetic section and logic section. Let's to have a discuss about the arithmetic section. The first one, functions of arithmetic section is to perform arithmetic operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. All complex operations are done by making repetitive use of the above operations. The next one, students, is logic section. Logic section, students, also is a part of arithmetic logic unit. The function of logic section is to perform logic operations such as comparing, selecting, matching, and merging of the data. Okay, students, let's go ahead. Okay, CPU's bus system. What do you think, students? What's this? As we started studied the students in the unit 2, the bus, as it relates to the pathway on the computer and in the processor, carries the various signals, addresses, and data. Remember, data is plural, that are transferred around the computer between its components. All that quiet dissimilar, it can be related to the routes of your local transit company in many ways. On the computer, a bus structure is a group of electronic transmission lines that connect the various components of the CPU, motherboard, and expansion cards to each other. Bus structures have different sizes, ranging from 16 to 64 bits on the modern microprocessors, and their size determines the amount of data that can be transmitted. Obviously, a 64-bit bus carries more data than a 16-bit bus. Within the computer, there are several bus structures as illustrated in the figure, and you are seeing that in your computer screen, maybe in the or the telephone screen. The most important of these are as the following. However, students, we had discussed about the type of buses in the computer fundamental book in the first semester, but here one recall them. The first one, students, the data bus. Data bus carries information to and from the CPU. The next one, students, address bus. Address bus carries the addresses from where data is to be read to where data is to be written. The next one, students, control bus. The control bus carries the signals used by the CPU and the other components of the computer. It communicates with each other, including when data is ready to be read, when another device wishes to use the bus, and the type of operation to be performed: read, write, interpret, or interrupt. Okay, students, let's go ahead. The next one, students, is the front side bus. The average CPU spends much of its time transferring data to and from the computer memory. The pathway on which this data travels are collectively called the front side bus. Also, it called the FSB or front side bus, called sometimes FSB, or the simple the bus. The front side bus speed determines how fast data travels between the CPU and memory. As a result, the faster the bus speed usually measured in megahertz or million of cycles per second, and the faster the computer performs. For more information, students, about the memory, see the section understanding memory in the next chapters. Okay, students, let's go ahead. I'm sorry. The next one, students, is packaging. When you look, students, at a microprocessor, like the processor shown in your computer screen, it's the packaging that you see rather than the microprocessor itself. That's packaged inside the ceramic or plastic outer shell. The outer covering of the processor, as you see, students, in the figure, on your computer screen or your telephone protects the core that contains the micro chip and the wiring that connects the chip to the processor's pin gate array or PGA. The pins of the PGA are inserted into the mounting socket or the slot edge connectors. Older packaging designs were often in ceramic, which has excellent heat resistance and dissipation properties. But most of Dutch processors are mounted in plastic encased. Uh, Also, it's called single edge contact cartridge cards. Students also it shows in the short letters SECC or single edge contact cartridge card. Packaging features students built in the mountain for a heatsink and a fan, which are used to cool the processor. More information on that in the next section that we will have a discuss about the core system in the next sections. Easy upgrading and high speed access by the motherboard to the CPU. Okay, students, here is the interesting section, students, the cooling system in a computer. Students, cooling system in the computer is cooling system in the human life. Do you have any fan or air condition or any Afghan cooler in your home or in your room? We use the cooling system or the coolers for cooling our room or cooling our uh, home or cooling our room. But when we use from a cooling system in our life in the summer, in the warm weather. As we students all know that the electronic tanks produce heat because of power consumption. Similarly, in the computer system, the CPU, VGA card, and all the other electronic chips produce heat, and as a result, it affects the speed and performance of the system. If the heat is not removed when there are chances of the processor and other components to be damaged permanently. So, in order to keep the internal temperature of the system low, the cooling system is provided and affected to it. All computer systems today comes with some cooling system to reduce and remove heat. There are basically two types of cooling systems used in the computer system, and they are students the uh, uh, case cooling and the CPU cooling. We will have a discuss about both of them separately. The first one is students case cooling. What's this, students? Do you have any idea about that? Okay, students, case cooling uses uh, air cooling system for the removal of heat from inside the case of the system. Air cooling is so common and a cheap method of cooling. Air cooling contains different kinds of air fans in order to pull the cool air in and push to hot air out. Sometimes large blocks of metal called heat sinks are attached to a heat producing components like CPU, VGA card in order to dissipate the heat more rapidly, which is also known as passive cooling. Most PCs have a combination of these fans for cooling. Front intake fan. This fan is used to bring fresh cold air into the computer for cooling purpose. It's attached in the front of the case. Read and top exhaust fans. These fans are used to take hot air out of the cases. The reed fan is attached at the back, and top of fan is attached at the top of the cases. A student's power supply exhaust fan. This fan is usually found at the back of the power supply and is used to cool the power supply and take the hot air out of the cases and power supply unit. Okay, students, the next one, CPU cooling. Before the Intel 686 microprocessors were cooled largely by the air flow inside the cases created by the system fan. This was called radiant cooling. Any heat radiated by the processor was cooled by air being sucked into the system case by the fan in the power supply. Beginning with the 486 processors were cooled with a heat sink or processor cooling fan. Attached directly to the surface of the processor. In addition, the system fan was reversed to extract the heat air from inside the computer cases and force it out. Okay, students, let's go ahead. Okay, students, the two most common methods for CPU cooling are the first one, air cooling. The parts inside most computers are cooled by air moving through the case. Similarly, for the CPU cooling, the heat sink with a fan fixed to its attached to the flat area of the CPU in order to cover maximum surface area. The heat sink basically consisted of the aluminum fins spread in the rolls, and the fan is attached at the top of side of the metal fins. The fan passes the air to the heat sink, and the hot air in the sink expands and comes out of the sink, and then it's pushed to outside of the cases through cases cooling systems. As a result, the temperature of the CPU doesn't exist. Okay, students, the next one is liquid cooling system. Liquid cooling system is also one of the method to cool a processor, but it's normally used in a special system because it takes a large space. Liquid cooling uses a special water block to conduct heat away from the processor as well as from the chipset. Water is circulated through this block to radiator through the pump where it's cooled. The radiator is provided with a fan attached to it. One main advantage of the liquid cooling is that it doesn't produce noise, and it's so quiet, but its disadvantage is that these are so expensive as compared to the air cooling system. Okay, students, let's go ahead. Okay, students, it was our lesson today. Please pay attention to your homework. The first question of your homework is describe the parts of processor. Students, however, we answered this question in the book page, and also please record them with yourself and share between the group. The next question of your homework, students, is what's the main job of cooling system in the computer? What's the main job, students, of the cooling system? However, the cooling system main job is clear in our life or in the computer life, but please give a few information about the main job of the cooling system in the computer. Okay, students, the last question of your homework is research about the newest processor in the market. Which one is the newest processor? However, we had the Core i7. We use Core i7 microprocessors or processors in this. Maybe there will be a newest. Please research about that. Okay, students, tomorrow we will start our lesson from sockets and slots. Thanks, students, for your watching. Have a good time. Good luck.